Welcome back to the Wolves of K Street podcast with Luke Mullins and Brody Mullins. Seems like our viewership has been pretty steady and rising in the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to jump forward in time in our book. The last episode we talked about the history of lobbying, and one of the fascinating things that we learned about was sort of like the ebb and flow of corporate power over time. And we sort of ended the last episode in the 1970s when companies are just starting to gain influence. And we're jumping forward now to later in the book and to really present time when corporations are all of a sudden losing influence. The rise of populists on the Republican side and progressives on the Democratic side have made the pro-business center that existed from the 1970s to more recently starting to fray. And to talk about that, we're going to have a special guest, Harrison Fields, a Republican who worked in the Trump first administration, who worked in the Trump second administration, just recently left to go downtown to work at a firm called CGCN. I think he'll have some great insights really from inside the White House and how the White House views big corporations and their influence these days. So we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with that. Welcome back to the Wolves of K Street podcast. Here with our guest, Harrison Fields. Harrison is a Trump alum two times through the White House, and a Florida native. Would love to have you introduce yourself, talk about how you got started in politics, what drew you to Washington, and what was it like working for Trump?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I like to tell younger interns and different people that I mentor that never compare your journey really to anyone, but especially not my journey here in our nation's capital. It's truly all a godsend, which I'm very fortunate to say that. But the reality is, I did not expect this journey to end up the way it has. I was born in New York, then moved to Florida at a young age, and really had no connection to anything political outside of my grandfather listening to Rush Limbaugh, like someone would listen to the weatherman during hurricane season every single day. And I didn't know it was forming my political ideology, but it was, and I'm fortunate for that. And talk about being tried by fire in school, not just in college, but in public education in South. Being a 14-year-old conservative was very strange for many to adopt and to really wrap their head around, not just because I was conservative, but because I was a minority conservative. And then landed all the way up in Tallahassee, about 7 hours from home in West Palm Beach, where I had an incredible college experience. It's an incredible school. And it really got me involved in politics and government in a way that I wasn't able to do in South Florida. I was able to intern at a local lobbying firm where I kind of got my first introduction into politics and how government works on a smaller scale. And in grad school, I was introduced to a guy by the name of Whitney Ray, who was the communications director to then Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. And he offered me a job to be a communications aide. And what that job did was open up many doors that I wouldn't even imagine. After grad school, I decided to take a risk and move to our nation's capital and work at a public affairs firm that I won't name, but if you looked at my LinkedIn page, you'd probably know what I'm talking about. And I'll be honest, it wasn't the best experience,
Oh,
but I'm
really?
realizing now how much more of an experience it was for me and beneficial. Because when I was working for Attorney General Pam Bondi, I was about 21, 22 years old, but they empowered me so much. They allowed me to brief her. They allowed me to really take the reins of my craft. And then you get to DC, this big ocean, and they really make you feel like a small fish. But in
Hmm.
life, you got to be humbled. So it was a really humbling time for me. And I stayed there for about a year and a half. And while I was looking to depart, someone asked me if I would want to work for President Trump. And I said, of course, I'm a Republican. I would like to work for the president.
Right.
Long story short, I was able to join at the end of 2019 as a presidential writer, where I served under the leadership of Desiree Thompson Sale, who's actually served in, this is her fourth administration. She served in first Bush. That's where she got her start. And then when Kayleigh McEnany became the press secretary, I followed. We all know her name, Caroline Levitt, who was one of my colleagues at
Yeah.
the Office of Presidential Correspondence. And she went ahead and became an assistant press secretary. And I said, I can become an assistant press secretary too. I worked for Pam Bondi as a communications ant. I can join Caroline Levitt. And by God's grace, I was able to join that team and really be with the president all throughout COVID and all the impeachment hoaxes and really kind of the most tumultuous of times towards the latter end of Trump 1.0. And of course, I had to find a new job after January 20th of 2021. And I was fortunate to land on Capitol Hill with hopefully the next governor of Florida, Byron Donalds, where I served for just over 3 years. Then went to Heritage, and
Okay.
I was done with politics. I was going to be done. My wife and I welcomed a new daughter, and we bought a house in Florida. We were ready to move. And Caroline Levitt became the press secretary, and she gave me a call. She said, I want you to be my principal deputy. So I said, let's stop packing. I'm sticking around DC for a little bit longer. And here I am. Just left the Trump administration as a special assistant to the president and principal deputy press secretary, one of the president's most senior spokespeople. Left in the end of August, really fulfilled my call there. And now I'm here at CGCN. Very fortunate to be with this team and being able to use all my time in government for the work that we do here, both in the strategic communication side of things, consulting, and advocacy.
Great. Yeah. So let's go back to in time to your time at Heritage. Because I think one of the themes of this show and the themes of Washington right now is sort of like how the Republican Party is changing and the rise of populism
Right.
in Washington. And there was, around the time you were there was this huge internal struggle inside Heritage, moving from Heritage's roots of like the, Ronald Reagan Republican Party, the George Bush Republican Party, to being a much more populist organization. Can you talk about some of your experiences there at Heritage, witnessing that internally?
Yes, that's definitely something that I was even concerned with when I applied. And it wasn't until I met with the president of Heritage where I actually said to myself, I think this is a very different Republican brand
Hmm.
than Heritage was traditionally branded as. I mean, Heritage has been a stalwart of conservatism for over 50 years. And I knew that to be true, but it was not my brand of conservatism. I'm not a country club conservative. I
Right.
am a grassroots conservative, a movement conservative, and a Trump conservative.
Right.
And at first, I was not sure if Heritage would have fit the mold, but I met Dr. Roberts, Dr. Kevin Roberts, and it seemed like he was on board with the movement. And one of the things he always said was, we have to know what time it is. And he was trying to lead the organization in a way that knew what time it was, and I felt comfortable going there. Obviously, we saw the Project 2025 woes and some of the recent challenges that Heritage has seen today. But overall, it's been an institutional pillar for the conservative movement. And I was fortunate for the 1 year that I was there.
Yeah. Can I
So,
ask you about Project 2025? Were you involved in that at all, or what were you able to see, as it was sort of being created?
Yeah, so I'm a communications guy by trade. One thing I realized was early on that the message on what Project 2025 was fumbled, both internally, but really from the media. This was really the mandate for leadership, which comes out every 4 years, and it's been coming out for every 4 years since Ronald Reagan was president, which was way before I was even born. So this was a continuation of a policy book, if you will, of recommendations that conservatives would get together. Really conservative nerds just like to write long white papers, and they made it a book. So that's all it was, but they made it out to be this doomsday plan for what Trump's going to do to America, which was unfortunate. And I don't think the comms internally really helped in many ways. But luckily, the American people trusted in President Trump and his policies. And we were able to obviously secure reelection.
Yeah.
it's interesting when I completely agree with you on the comms and sort of the perception of Project 2025. I've been more interested in sort of what the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is trying to do when it comes to legislating big businesses and corporations. And if you look at those parts of Project 2025, when they talk about antitrust, they really talk about how there's the need for even conservative antitrust regulators to beef up enforcement, which is sort of a fascinating thing. When you read that section, you might think it was
Yeah.
written by Lena Khan.
It's funny. They call it the shoehorn or the horseshoe of the horseshoe, sorry, of politics, in which you have the far right and the far left really agreeing on political stances, and antitrust is one of them. You see kind of a weird faction in 2016, and where you had the Bernie Bros voting for President Trump. So you do have the far right and the far left being weird, awkward bedfellows. You have AOC and Ted Cruz teaming up on different projects. So there are more bipartisan things. We just don't talk about them. And I know the president is working on, and the Republicans are working on a healthcare package now, going through the House. And I think you're going to see some alignment on some of the basics when it comes to how we get a hold of our healthcare system.
Yeah. Harrison, I'd love to ask you about, from your perspective, working both in Trump 1 and Trump 2, have you seen any changes in the way in sort of Trump's views and posture towards big business?
Um, the president is a unabashed capitalist. He is a CEO by trade. He loves American entrepreneurial spirit. He loves American corporations. But he also realizes that we have a problem in corporate America, in which, while Republicans have always been extremely favorable to them, they haven't been very favorable back. And if you look at really the financial services industry, particularly when it came to the debanking of not just President Trump, but his family and of some conservatives, the president has been very clear that we do have a problem in corporate America. But one thing he's not going to do is make them the villain. And you see that a lot on the left. They make corporate America the villain. You see with Zoran Mamdani getting elected, raising the corporate interest, income taxes and whatnot. The president wants corporations to be incorporated here, brought here. You're seeing historic investments here. So he definitely has a respect for corporate America that does not come blindly by any means. But he understands that capitalism is the only way to go, and he wants to make sure we preserve it because, let's be honest, socialism is on the rise. It's becoming more and more favorable. Look at the election of Zoran Mamdani. Look at what just happened in a very red district in Tennessee. You had the AOC of Tennessee basically come within 10 points of winning a plus 22 district. So you're seeing more and more Americans in their desperation look at democratic socialism as an option, and the president is standing firm on capitalism and standing by corporate America.
So,
Yeah.
given that change in both the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, with Trump, how do big companies operate in DC right now? What is the best things that companies can do to sort of get their message out to Washington, even the Wall Street guys?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And a lot of companies are looking at this exact question. How do we make it in MAGA? And the reality is, a lot of people are starting to roll back their DEI policies. You just saw AT&T did that recently. You're seeing company after company kind of just focus on the things that really matter to a company's bottom line. They're doing away with a lot of ESG policies. They're doing away with anything that is not of business. They're not focusing on red. They're not focusing on blue. They're really focusing on green, which is really all we want from corporate America. They want to build a relationship with this president. Look no further than our energy companies. These are companies that were really kept in the dark for 4 years under the previous administration. About month 2 or 3, President Trump had a massive roundtable with all the energy executives, and every single one of them said it's great to be back in the White House because we were treated like villains for the last 4 years. So you're seeing a monumental shift in which we're having these conversations with corporate America. You saw the Dell family just donate $2.2 billion for President Trump's kids accounts, which you wouldn't really see a donation of that level to a government project before. So you're seeing corporate America and the president and his team come together in a marriage that could be dysfunctional in some times, but it's a mutual one. And they understand that America voted very loudly. And we went from, the pendulum swinging all the way to the left, but moving more center right. And businesses, to their credit, are making that change as well.
Harrison, can I ask you just to sort of follow up on that? One of the biggest questions on K Street now is the sort of same question that it was during Trump's first term. Is like, what is the best way, right, to influence Trump and to bring Trump around to your position? And during this period, certainly during the first Trump administration, there was a lot of sort of wild ideas and off the wall stuff that folks on K Street were doing. Geofencing, Mar-a-Lago. Just a lot of sort of off the wall stuff here. I'm interested in your perspective, both having worked in the inside and then now on the outside. What are some of the tactics that what are some of the misconceptions in terms of tactics that people think might work but don't actually do anything?
People actually think that you have to basically kiss the ring, and it's not that at all. He is a president that wants to hear all sides. And one of the things that I like to say is just because the policy that you have may be different than what the president has publicly stated, or what you think the administration may be more focused in on, does not mean you should hide it. You can have that conversation. There's just some blatant things that obviously the administration would not agree upon, but just because there's a difference does not mean there can't be a communication. This White House is very, very open. If you look at the Office of Public Liaison, the Department of DPC, um, this White House is open for these conversations. So, one, having an active stream of communications here at CGCN, we do it very, very well, making sure you're tapped in, not just at the White House, but within all the agencies and departments. We have those connections. We're able to have those conversations, but you also have to play ball. And in order to play ball, there are different things. We see clients contributing to ballrooms. We see, America 250 donations. There are different ways you can show good faith efforts to support not just the administration, but really the country at large. Um, but the one thing we have to stress is that you have to come to the table in good faith. And you're seeing a lot of corporations wanting to do that because you have an administration that is really extending out an olive branch to anyone who wants to reach out. And you come in with good faith, with sound policy, and you have those conversations. I've seen it from the inside. We may disagree with you, but we'll be very transparent in saying, well, this is where we don't like. Is there a common ground? And you go back to the drawing board. And just because you have to go back to the drawing board doesn't mean the conversation ends. It just forging better policy, better conversations, better relationships. And it's going to take time. You're not going to snap your fingers and get your way. It's going to take work. It's going to take professionals from K Street to connect the dots to kind of bridge that gap. But you have willing partners in this administration. And as long as you have willing clients, you can hopefully find some success.
What do you think at its core has made Donald Trump into a populist?
It's a great question. He truly cares about the American people. Make America great again, America first aren't just slogans. These are ways of life. You don't have to just look back at tape from 6, 12 years ago. You go back 30, 40 years. He was talking about this. He really wants to make sure that America at its core is strong, that it's American, and that it's protected at all costs. And he doesn't want to see America sold out. He doesn't want to see cities like Detroit or Milwaukee or Buffalo, in Bangladesh or in Thailand or in Cambodia. He wants to see a thriving America, and he's doing so by forging the economic strength, the diplomatic strength that we have and that his team has to really make sure that this country is put in the driver's seat once more. I feel like uh, many people on my side kind of feel like we took our foot off the gas the last 4 years and have kind of neglected America's stature. And we saw the consequences of that, with the wars that continue to transpire in some cases, issues at our southern border. It really seems like American leadership took a pause, and the president is really taking that back and with a vengeance. And this is what the American people voted for.
Can I ask you, Harrison? Can you point to any industries that you think sort of have got it right, that have effective campaigns or ways to influence Trump and with regard to policy?
Yeah, I mean, drill baby drill was a slogan, right? If you are a drilling company in America, you have a friend in President Trump. But really, if you have a company in America that plans on bringing business here, investing here, American jobs, you too are going to be in a good position. You see energy CEOs time and again coming out and saying thank you to this president. We just saw yesterday with the cafe standards. Going back to pre-Biden eras in which you're going to see historic changes when you go to purchase your next car. You saw dealers, automakers, GM, a bunch of different companies coming out and celebrating what the president and the administration did with those standards. So you're seeing time and again corporations coming out and saying, um, we are on board with the policy. And the nice thing about a lot of these CEOs, for the most part, they're not focused on a lot of these other narratives. You know, what the Chiron may be saying on CNN, MS Now, Fox, even Fox News or Newsmax, they're not really worried about that. They're worried about their bottom line. They're worried about the policy, whether that's through executive order, whether that's through a regulation change, whether that's through something that's done in Congress. So they're really head down and they're really focused on the bigger picture. And the good thing is, you know, the president, he's really not bogged down by a lot of the media narratives either. He's chugging along in record speed, and if you look at all the executive orders, if you look at the historic passage of One Big Beautiful Bill, this is a very focused unit at the Trump White House and really on Capitol Hill that is determined to make sure that they get through the conservative agenda. And many companies are hailing its success because it's directly impacting them in a positive way.
So, one of the things that everyone's trying to figure out on K Street in Washington is this populism here to stay, or is this something that once Trump leaves Washington, Washington will go back to normal? What do you think?
It's hard to see the pendulum switching back this soon. I think it was just too big of a victory across the 8 swing states when you talk about the popular vote and the electoral vote. I truly believe that the American electorate is in this populist kind of era. We obviously don't want to talk 2028 yet because we still got a lot of time before then. But if you just look at the next slew of candidates from our side, you're going to see a continuation of this MAGA populist movement. But in many ways, you're seeing that on the left too. You're seeing Democrat socialism being this cornerstone, this new hot fad in the Democratic Party, and that mirrors a populist wing of the Democratic Party as well. So I think either way you swing it, you're seeing a very populist kind of DNA in the parties, and I truly think it's here to stay.
Well, let me ask you just to follow up on that. I mean, a rising tide of populism on the left and the right would seem to be bad news for corporations, specifically big corporations. You know, what advice would you have, right, for big businesses, sort of in this time specifically, but even speaking more generally, right, about a Washington that is sort of beset by populism? What advice would you have for big businesses that are trying to operate in this type of environment?
Yeah, I think like in life, money talks, and in order to really have an impact, it sometimes has to hurt in the pocketbook, and you're seeing that in many states. I mean, a state like Illinois losing massive corporations to a state like Tennessee, my home state of Florida, to South Carolina. When you are pulling out because of crime, because of economic conditions, because of high taxes, and going to Texas, going to North Carolina, going to Georgia, that eventually is going to have an impact. There's been a lot of talk in New York City. A lot of corporations are wondering, is New York City a place for me long term? Because they're already talking about raising the corporate income tax. They're already
Hmm.
talking about, things that they would do a crime that would make it not favorable for people to live there. So there's a lot of internal conversations that corporations are having. At the end of the day, they're going to look at their books. They're going to say, does it make more sense to one, operate in America, which under this president, I would argue the answer is yes. And then you look at where you're headquartered. Does it make sense to be here? And if the answer is no, they're going to move just like average Americans. This is not just a corporation's problem. Americans are doing this themselves. Why am I going to live in New York? Why am I going to live in New Jersey? Why am I going to live in Connecticut when I can move to a state like Florida, in which the governor is already talking about getting rid of property taxes and where you don't have state income taxes? So policy is always going to drive people in and out of a state. And I think corporations are looking at this and they're going to have to determine what's best for their bottom line. But I can tell you this, any state, any national policy that's going to be favorable for business, you're going to see business stay and you're going to see businesses come in. You're seeing that with the trillions of dollars of investments in just 11 months that this president was able to secure. Because if you make this country a favorable place to grow, to innovate, you look at the AI boom and everything that the president, David Sachs, and the team are doing when it comes to AI, you're making this country favorable for these people to invest in. And at the end of the day, that's the goal.
Let's talk a little bit more about the horseshoe, which I find so fascinating. I look at Josh Hawley, who in the last year has probably introduced more bills with Democrats than he has with Republicans, or at least the ones that I've noticed. With Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on bills to cap credit card interest rates, or to make it easier for workers to join labor unions, or to reduce healthcare costs. How do you think that? Will there really be like a true alliance between the far right and the far left going forward? And could that be a majority coalition?
Well, it's a good question because just when I'm hopeful, I become more pessimistic because it's not politically advantageous, especially going into 2026, to kind of hold hands and sing kumbaya. Because at the end of the day, both sides, and I'd argue the Democrats are probably more hooked on power. And in order to secure power, you cannot be friends with the enemy. That's just a fact. So I'm hopeful that folks like Hawley and Warren and Tim Scott and let's say Mazie Hirono can come together and unify around different things. You're seeing that out of Senate banking. They just passed out an incredible housing piece of legislation that can, help with our affordability crisis when it comes to housing. And that could potentially come into law with the House voting favorably and the president signing it. So there are ways. I think healthcare, as you mentioned, is a place where I think you can see some overlap. But one of the things that I think a lot of people were kind of shocked by was one big beautiful bill. You had zero Democrat support there, despite a provision or two that they might not have liked. You're talking no taxes on tip, no taxes on overtime, massive changes to the tax structure for average Americans, and they didn't support that. But there's another example in which they come together. Look at the Epstein files. Also look at stock trading for members of Congress. You're seeing bipartisan support there as well. So there is a possibility there. The unfortunate reality is members are up every 2 years. So you've got 1 year out of that 2 years where you're probably going to see them be supportive of anything bipartisan. But going into what will be a very hard knuckle 2026, I don't see a lot of room for bipartisan bills and support. But I hope I am wrong. It's just the nature of the beast right now.
Yeah. Luke, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's just that it's interesting, right? This does seem to be sort of a new world of operating in this period of populism that will continue to be a reality sort of regardless of the outcome of the next election, right? I mean, just in terms of the influence of populism inside both parties right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you talk to average Americans, and there's frustration, and there is a fatigue for what they went through the last 4 years. There is a immediate desire for their problem to go away. Um, uh, but the problems are many, but the solutions are coming. And I'm confident that as long as we can continue to focus on deregulation, focus on lowering taxes, bringing investment back into this country, doing the easy thing like, securing our border and, finding unity on, fentanyl and different things like that, we can really come together as a country. We've seen it before. We've seen the ability for members to act in a bipartisan way. Um, and it's just going to take time. I'm hopeful. The president was able to pardon someone like Henry Cuellar, and, I think that gives some people some hope that despite the political differences, we can come together. And, the second we give up on that hope that America is not done yet, I think we'll end up falling by the wayside. But politics is a bloodbath. It's a blood sport. We all know that going in. We've all have our battle wounds. But the reality is, Washington, D.C. is always going to change. You just got to be prepared for that change. And here at CGCN, we try to be 1, 2, 10 steps ahead of that change so we can help our corporate partners and our clients navigate this new world of ever changing Washington. But it's one of these places that you just got to white knuckle it. You got to hold the wheel and say, Jesus, take it. And next thing you know, you'll find yourself in another election cycle, and the craziness continues.
Craziness continues. That seems to be the perfect way to end this. Harrison, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Wolves of K Street podcast. Fascinating talk with Harrison Fields. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, very interesting. And I agree with his point. It really does seem like, regardless of the outcome of the midterms or the next presidential election, populism's influence inside both parties does seem to be both real and durable. And it's the kind of thing that, corporate America and the private sector, in order to achieve their agendas in Washington, that's going to be a big challenge. And that's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with, regardless of who wins, in 2028.
Yeah, and Harrison called it the horseshoe, the far right and the far left coming together in the middle. And I agree with Luke. I feel like that's a durable coalition. Like, is it a majority coalition? Which we asked Harrison. He wasn't quite sure. I'm not quite sure either. If it's who has the majority. I don't think that the populist progressive have the majority right now. They still seem to be the fringes, but the middle of both parties is disappearing. And so at some point, we could really have this tipping point. It's a really fascinating time in history where we're literally watching Washington change week by week, month by month, and possibly pivot back to a different era of power in DC.